You can close that mic there so people in the back can hear you there.
Here, okay. I live in Asheville, North Carolina. My name's Larry. And I saw something about 10 years ago. I don't know what it was. It wasn't like Bigfoot. It was more like the goblin thing. Or actually, at the time, I was saying, oh, I saw a dryad. So, I mean, it was weird. I was sitting there waiting for my daughter to come out of a Harris Teeter. And Asheville's in the mountains, so there was woods around on the road. But it was still pretty much in Asheville. There was a little line of trees in the parking lot, you know, and there was something there. I'm thinking I'm making something out of the leaves. And then it moved, and I thought, oh, what is that kid doing in a costume? It's September, you know? It's not October yet, Halloween. So, I mean, that was my initial reaction until it turned around, its head turned around, and it had this weird little face that was not human. And it was dusk, so I couldn't, I thought it was the same color as the leaves, but you know at dusk, you can't really tell. And I sat there and I moved my head around to see whether it would, you know, trying to figure out if I was making it out of the leaves and everything, and tried to find one in a tree over me on the next, and it was still there. Then I saw my daughter coming, and I turned my head to see my daughter, turned back, the thing was gone. And I didn't see it run away. And I'm like, I have no idea what it was to this day. I did see a picture of a harpy eagle, and it was kind of like that face. There aren't any harpy eagles in Asheville, North Carolina. Can I just put that out there? And I even checked with the Nature Center to see if there was one that got away. No, they've never had a harpy eagle. And the only reason I thought that might be reasonable, even though I had seen what looked like arms and legs, was that if the thing flew away, I wouldn't have seen it run away. So that is the weird thing I have seen. I don't know, but when I heard about Kentucky goblins and stuff, I said, I saw a goblin, that's what it was.
Well, in terms of like, so you said the initial interpretation that you had upon the observations, what is that kid doing in a costume?
That was my initial.
By kid, like what age group would you say that to help determine the size of what you saw?
Maybe 5 years old. I mean, not like toddler, because I would have been out of the car, worked for DSS. So, you know, I would have been out looking for mama so it was a child that was old enough so I could say mom was in a car someplace, or, you know, whatever. So 5 years old, 6 years old, first grade, that high, you know, crouching down in a tree with a costume. That was my initial thought.
And like in terms of color, I'm assuming it's sort of like a uniform color from head to toe, right? Like one color.
Yeah, it looked like a costume.
Mm-hmm.
And that, like I said, it kind of matched. I thought it was the same colors. That's why I thought I might have been making it out of the leaves. Mm-hmm. So it must have been like a greenish color.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Yeah, I mean, growing up in Southern Appalachia, I've been pursuing the Sasquatch subject there for about 20 years. So I've pretty myopically focused on these kind of large mystery ape sightings. So I haven't personally encountered that many sightings of something matching that description. But obviously it does sound somewhat consistent with like the Kelly Hopkinsville, whatever was seen there that was called goblins, etc.
It wasn't until I saw Hellier that I thought, I might have seen a goblin. I thought, I mean, I'm a witch, I thought dryads.
Well, one thing that's always interested me is like people that have those kind of experiences, were you reluctant to tell, like, do you remember the first time that you told someone else, hey, I saw this thing?
Oh, I have no shame. Like I said, I'm a witch, I'm very out there, and sure, I'll tell people.
So it wasn't that difficult for you to relate that to
Not at all.
other
People think I'm weird no matter what I do.
Did people just kind of try to interpret that as, oh, it probably was a kid, or it probably was this or that?
You know, that is very interesting. Like I said, Asheville's got a lot of weird people, and I'm in a lot of the pagan groups and stuff. So my pagan groups, they all thought fairies, dryads, that kind of thing was their initial. Green man, might have been a baby green man, whatever. The people that I come to paranormal conference with, you know, people who are into like Bigfoot and things, immediately baby Bigfoot. I did get that one time, and a lot of people were. Then I have friends I'm in a Star Trek group too. What can I say? They're very skeptical. Alien was one, and also then they're skeptical. A lot of them are skeptical, and they were the ones who were trying to figure out. That's where the harpy eagle part came in. And somebody said, well, did it look like this? And showed me a picture. And I said, yeah, it did kind of look like that. If you ever seen a harpy eagle, they're very weird looking. So, you know, it depended on the group, they had a different take on it.
Interpretation, yeah.
Yeah, but I'm like, well, yeah, but that's what I saw.
Yeah, well, that's fascinating. In my experience, you know, there might be some real external impetus, correct, that is observed, and then we do our best to use the language we have at hand to describe what it was that was observed, but it's entirely dependent not only on the observer's interpretive schema, but the interpretive schema of the people who are looking into that. And so when you have a phenomenon that's entirely unknown, you know, that's very legitimate and real and external, essentially your mind will generate hypotheses, we would say, you know, responsibly, but in reality they're fantasies. You're generating these imaginative productions to try to approximate what it was that you encountered in this unknown phenomenon. And so the contents of those imaginative processes come from within your own psyche and your own interpretive schema. So it's very often the case that people, you know, observe a very real thing. Like a good analogy would be if a set of people saw lights in the sky, and that's the observation. There are lights in the sky, and you had 5 different observers, and they could all tell you, oh, well, that's just, you know, secret U.S. military technology that we don't know about yet. And someone else would say, no, that's foreign military technology, and this is a sign of impending global war. And someone else says, no, that's celestial activity, that's occurring in the sky. And someone from a spiritual schema might say, no, it's angelic or demonic, and someone else might say, no, it's extraterrestrial craft being piloted by intelligent individuals with intention. Those are all interpretations. It doesn't change. The observation was that there are lights in the sky, and then you have these multiple interpretations. So I think as researchers, we should constantly be trying to discriminate and distinguish between observation and interpretation, both of which are valuable. But, you know, an observation is of a sufficient value that we record those. We shouldn't throw out interpretations, but you have to distinguish between the two. I think much of what you see within, you know, since I'm more focused on the Sasquatch thing than other things, I just find it interesting that you observe something and people who are following the UFO topic have an alien perspective on it, people have a spiritual perspective, people have, oh, it's juvenile Sasquatch, or oh, it's this type of thing, you know, depending on their personal interpretive schema, you know, and how robust that might be. But a lot of what you see associated with the Sasquatch phenomenon, and I'll speak to that particularly since that's been the focus of my pursuit, is really differentiated by not only the interpretations of the eyewitnesses, but very often from the investigators and the people pursuing that. So you come up with these ideas, very often people will say, well, there's multiple types. There's various types of Sasquatch. And they'll base that on the testimonies of eyewitnesses, what was observed, the language that those observations are couched within, and then how those are interpreted. The evidence doesn't show any sort of variation beyond that which would reasonably explain variation in age and sex of the individuals, you know, male, female animals of various sizes due to their various ages, etc. So the analogy that I always use was like, imagine if you took 2 hypothetical observers, you know, as a thought experiment, observer A and observer B. Neither of these people have had any exposure whatsoever to any information about gorillas at all. They basically don't know that gorillas exist, let's say. You take observer A to the San Diego Zoo, and they are able to observe, you know, through this thick glass in broad daylight, a silverback male interacting with females and young. Let's say for 2 hours, let's say for 4 hours. Very long period of time, right? It's well lit, they're safe behind this glass. Now, we share about 97 to 98% of our DNA with gorillas, and so you can look at certain gorilla behaviors and think how man-like it is, but really it's, you know, they're shared behaviors that we both share. So that observer would pick up on all these things, that the way the gorillas move. And, I mean, I've seen gorillas, you know, working on their nails with their teeth and then looking at it from the distance, just very much like a person. These are shared behaviors. You take that person and say, what did you just see? And they'll say, that was the most man-like animal I've ever seen in my entire life. They're beautiful. They're so much like us. They're so tender, the way it interacted. It's mind-blowing. You take observer B and you drop them off in the Virunga Mountains at dusk, and they're alone, and they're lost, and they're scared. And they're making their way through a thick forest, and they can hear something skulking along and following them. And then, in a flash of a moment, a silverback male bursts through the brush, baring its teeth and screaming. You know, male gorillas have very, very long canine teeth. They're used for display for sexual selection to attract females, so they're not, you know, necessarily that dangerous. But they see a big silverback male, it's screaming, baring giant fangs with that huge gaping mouth, the person falls down into the fetal position, and before they know it, the thing's gone. They've only seen it for like a second and a half. What do you think that person will tell you? There's nothing man-like about that animal whatsoever. It's terrifying, it's grotesque, it's a monster. They're describing the exact same animal in two different contexts, in two different environments, etc. And so we would come away with like various interpretations about, well, there's one type of gorilla that's very man-like and peaceful, and there's another type that's evil and monstrous. No, 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 no. So very often I think we do that with the Sasquatch phenomenon, and it does boil down to that observation versus interpretation. So I just think your story is so illuminating that you're accurately describing what you observed, and then talking about all the various interpretations that you were met with by people that would use your story, let's say, to support something that they were studying. Like, oh, I know someone who saw an alien. No, 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 I know someone who saw a baby Sasquatch or a baby green man, and on and on and on. So it's important to differentiate those things. It's difficult to do as researchers to make the distinction between the subjective and the objective. Because you know what, we're all subjects. It's impossible for us to be objective. Everything that we experience is in the realm of the subjective. And so it's a difficult endeavor. But does anybody else have a sighting that they'd like to share? An observation or maybe an experience? But I think while we're still on the topic of sightings, or even for like a question and answer sort of thing, maybe for the woman who shared her observation, or anything else related to the Sasquatch phenomenon? Since we're in a town hall setting.
I have a question for you.
Yes, sir.
What do you think the population in North America would be in order for them to keep surviving and keep living?
Certainly. So if anyone could hear the question would be, what would be a good population estimate for the population of North America? I'm assuming you're referring to Sasquatches,
Yes,
correct?
Yes.
Well, I think it's easy to look at something. If you're looking for analogous animals, obviously the black bear is the most analogous animal to the Sasquatch, in that it is a very large omnivorous mammal that, as native to North America, let's say, it came via Asia, as we assume Sasquatches probably did. About 75% of North American mammals made it into here from Asia. And so it's certainly worth positing that as an example. But there are certain guesswork, I guess, that we can do based on black bears. It's not a one-to-one ratio. Like, for example, when you increase in body mass, there's not a one-to-one increase in caloric need. So if you had two hypothetical apes of 50 pounds, what they would require would be more, actually, than one hypothetical of the same ape that weighed 100 pounds. So that it's not like a one-to-one, every pound you add, you need the same amount of calories. The larger you are for that species, you actually need fewer calories. So it's not quite as simple as taking a black bear and saying, well, your average adult male black bear in Appalachia is 250 pounds. You could say your average adult male Sasquatch seems to be in the neighborhood between like 750 and 1,000 pounds. So you couldn't just take a black bear's caloric needs and triple it or quadruple it and come up with an estimate. But that's about the closest that we could do. But you would look at the total population of black bears across North America and how they're distributed, what home range size they need or require to sustain themselves, and then do some math, I think, based on body size for Sasquatch, but you'd still only come up with really rough, oblique estimates. I think at the end of the day, nobody really knows, but it would certainly be in the thousands. I know that people have postulated that there's maybe one Sasquatch for every 100 black bears. I think that's probably highly dependent on habitat. I mean, being from Southern Appalachia, I tend to think it's the best, because we all think that where we're from is like the greatest place in the world. But in a lot of ways in North America, it's hard to beat Appalachia. Especially Southern Appalachia, there's about 135,000 square miles of that constitutes temperate rainforest, and it's the second most biodiverse temperate rainforest on the planet. The only temperate forest with more biodiversity than Southern Appalachia is in central China. And because of that, there's such a great amount of food resources. An animal's home range, basically the amount of land that it uses to sustain itself, is only going to be as large as it has to be for that animal. Because animals are not going to expend, a surplus of calories unless it's absolutely necessary. So for an adult male black bear in Southern Appalachia, their home range is roughly 16 to 18 square miles on average. Now, if you take that same black bear, that same size in the Pacific Northwest, it's going to be about 50 to 75 square miles on average. If you put that bear in the Intermountain West, That's more like 75 to 100 square miles to sustain the same animals. So Appalachian forests are sufficiently rich enough that it only takes 18 square miles, roughly speaking, to produce the same amount of food for an omnivore that it takes 75 square miles of Pacific Northwestern forest or 100 square miles of Intermountain West, like Rockies forest. So those population estimates are going to be really determined, I guess you would say, because there are more black bears per unit of land mass in southern Appalachia than there are in the Northwest, I think it would be safe to make the same oblique estimate for Sasquatches. Now, people from the Northwest don't like to hear that. Now, I moved from Georgia. I spent 3 years living in the Pacific Northwest after I'd already been pursuing the Sasquatch for a while. Of course, you know, they think that the Pacific Northwest is sort of like the mecca of the Sasquatch region. We've got them all out here, and there's not any east of the Rockies and that sort of thing. But I think whatever number you could reasonably arrive at, that's as the minimum necessary number, is probably the closest to correct. I don't think that there's, you know, hundreds of thousands of them in North America. I think even with the black bear population in all of North America, it's about 650,000. It's a little over 500,000 black bears for all of North America. And again, there's various concentrations, you know, in various places. I don't think Sasquatches occur everywhere that people say that they occur. Again, going back to observation versus interpretation and your interpretive schema, you know, there's a whole lot of ideas that arise around animals in oral tradition and folklore. One of the things that's very commonly attributed to Sasquatches, in even other mystery apes in other parts of the world, is this idea for indigenous peoples that to speak about them would be to draw them near. So you didn't speak about them because then they would be around. Well, I've experienced that myself in modern day, is that when you introduce people to the idea that Sasquatches might exist, they incorporate that into their interpretive schema, and then everything at night is now a Sasquatch. Like every bump in the night, every divot in the ground is a track, every broken twig is evidence of the thing passing through. And that's because, you know, most people don't, if you have like a multiple choice list in your mind of, you know, what might be responsible for that bump in the night, for most people, an unidentified ape is not on that list. You know, it's bear, moose, deer, elk, wild hog, et cetera, et cetera. And you introduce the idea of the Sasquatch again to speak about it, and now they're behind every tree. You know, now they're everywhere. And so I do think that it's not just a matter, people often get tied up in this, like, does the Sasquatch exist, or is it just a social construct? Is it biologically real, or is it a psychological phenomenon? I.e., is it nature or is it culture? And the reality is it's probably both. There's a natural animal nested within these cultural productions. And so you see that there are these Sasquatch reports from every state, you know, in the country and all these places that don't necessarily constitute viable habitat. And I think time would tell that they do seem to be in the Appalachians, the Ozarks, the Ouachitas, you know, these heavily forested mountainous regions. They occasionally occur in these other green belts that connect those areas, but I certainly don't think they're in all the places they are said to be. So if we're going by dots on a map, we might arrive at one kind of guesstimate of how many Sasquatches are in North America. But I think what you reasonably have to do is look at habitat and look at analogous animals, most importantly the black bear, and try to make some kind of extrapolation. So I know it's a very long-winded answer to your question, but the short answer is, like, heck, we don't know and nobody knows yet, you know.